Okay, I think I am live on Facebook. I can't actually see anything because I am sharing my screen. Let me just see if I can do something about that. Hang on. Now it is telling me that I'm live streamed. Great. Okay. I think I've sorted it out. I do this all the time, and yet it's like learning how to ride a bicycle every time. In any case, welcome. We have the lovely Kathy who's actually joined us in the Zoom. If you guys are on Facebook and actually have registered for the Zoom, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, this is being live streamed to the public Facebook group as of now. And for those who have registered, you'll get exclusive access to the webinar recording before it gets published. So welcome. Hope everyone had a great public holiday yesterday and have enough energy to slog it out for another day until the weekend. And if you've caught any of the social media and email blasts that I've done, I'm doing a free webinar series. So tonight is lesson 1 or part 1 of that 3-part series called Woke Willpower. Love a good cheesy name, so you'll have to apologise for some of the cringe-worthy material that might filter its way in for tonight. Yeah, so I've basically got a bit of a lesson overview, and what we'll be covering tonight is to understand the true nature of willpower. A lot of people have some misconceptions around what willpower actually is and how you can muster it, and how some people might have more willpower than others. We're going to talk a little bit about default decision making, and then we're going to talk about why minding your mind is important. Now, that might not make much sense to you right now, but hopefully as we get through the webinar, that'll start to make a bit more sense. I hope so. I'm sure that someone will let me know if it doesn't. And then obviously, okay, we've got the so what, so then what do we do from there? So we'll have a 2-minute exercise at the end, which is a little worksheet which I sent out to those who had registered already today. I think I can, well, I'll be able to send it again afterwards. You'll be able to go through it. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if we get time, I'll actually take you through that exercise in tonight's webinar as well. And just a reminder that there is actually a little free gift for those who stick out to the end. If you are watching live on Facebook, could you let me know by commenting if you're watching live or whether or not you're watching the replay? That would be great. And then if you've got any questions, just post them there. Unfortunately, I don't have enough screens. You'd think 2 would be enough, but it is not. And so I can't actually see the questions live. So if you're not in the Zoom, I can't answer your questions directly, but I can certainly revert after the webinar. All right, let's get on to the presentation, shall we? Okay. So hopefully that's in big enough writing that you can see, but this is a famous quote about willpower, which says, people do not lack strength, they lack will. And it's an interesting concept, right? Because I think that is the dominant rhetoric that we kind of have floating through around what people think willpower is. So by definition, willpower is the ability to control oneself and determine one's actions, displaying self-control within and without. And it would seem that when Googling, and then obviously as well, there's some other definitions as well. So I actually did a bit of a Google on some inspirational quotes and definitions of willpower. And the top 5 that came up were, willpower is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it gets. Number 2, people, well, the one I just read, which from Victor Hugo. Number 3, people don't just find the strength and the willpower they need, they create it. Number 4, willpower isn't something that gets handed out to some and not to others. It's a skill you can develop through understanding and practice. And 5, it's not that some people have the willpower and some don't. It's just that some people are ready to change and others are not. James Gordon. So in theory, willpower is something you lack, or perhaps a muscle or skill that you can find, create, and or develop. Oh, and by the way, you have to actually want to change, otherwise willpower doesn't work at all. All right. Well, I think that sort of leaves the definition lacking. So It's not surprising, I guess, then when people say things like, I just don't have the willpower to say no to cake or to go to the gym, or I just don't have the same discipline or self-control as you to exercise regularly. Have you ever heard yourself saying something like that? Well, then tell me, how does that sometimes then explain when 1 minute you can be really strong-willed and then moments later, it's like willpower has ghosted you? So, for example, have you ever experienced that really great willpower at the beginning of the day, only to lose it when you actually need it to do the one thing you wanted to do today? That happens to me, to be honest. And then what about this situation? Does this sound familiar? So when I worked FIFO, I had several colleagues who were motivated, inspired, and keen to come to the gym with me after work. One colleague in particular, let's just call her Sally, for the sake of this example. She would occasionally come to the gym with me. The next day, she would then tell me how much she enjoyed the workout, and she was pumped to go on her own, as I was like flying out the next day, and she was going to go on her own in the evening. Throughout the day, unprompted, Sally would mention several times how excited and committed she was and going to the gym that night. But then by about 2 or 3 p.m., she would then tell me that she was exhausted and wasn't going to go to the gym anymore. Has anyone else done that? Of course, I'm asking like I can see anyone. I can't. All right. And well, in Sally's case, she did have the willpower. And in her case, she managed to invoke fatigue by constantly choosing the same decision throughout the day. Long before, oh, hang on, let me just go to my next slide. So long before the end of the workday, Sally had already willed herself out. So there's actually a phenomenon called decision fatigue, and this is probably the most famous example that you might have seen as an Instagram quote or something like that. But actually, yeah, it's called decision fatigue. And, you know, I guess Barack Obama is probably someone who understood it well, supposedly. He would actually pare down some of the decisions that he would have done. So he told Vanity Fair that you'll see I only wear grey or blue suits. And essentially, I'm trying to pare down my decisions. I don't want to make decisions about what I'm eating or wearing, because I have too many other decisions to make. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to get at, that's sort of a bit of a side note, is when you say that you don't have willpower, you're kind of right. And it's not uncommon for willpower, for you not to have willpower. And when you say you don't have willpower, yeah, you're kind of right, but not entirely. And we'll go into why that is. So in my next example, this is me when I haven't been fed, by the way. So I don't know how many of you have been, how long you, or who on the call, sorry, has been a long-term community member, but you would have remembered for some previous presentations. And by the way, if you haven't actually joined the private community, you can, and what you'll find in there is actually a guide section. So all the guest speaker presentations, speaker notes, and any worksheets or freebies as well are actually located under the guide section under there. So that's all free for community members to access. So anyway, one of our previous guest speakers talked a lot about the importance of being aware of your old choices. And the reason being is that when you're aware of your old choices, you now have an option or a choice to make another. The complication with that, though, is our ability to make choices we want is impacted by our self-control or willpower. And so I guess the reason I put this picture up here is that there's a forgotten wisdom that toddlers impart or can impart to us adults about willpower. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to, well, first have a look at the next slide, because I think we can all relate to this lady here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you to close your eyes for a minute. And I'm going to just walk through a scenario and just see if this sort of gives you an idea around how willpower works. So everyone's eyes are closed. Okay. So I want you to imagine this situation. Well, first of all, let's just take a deep breath so you can kind of get into the mode of it. So if you just inhale for 4 breaths, exhale for 4 breaths. One more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then just allow your body to go back into its normal breathing rhythm. Now, this isn't a meditation. I just wanted to get you open and have your still your thoughts just a little bit so that I can talk about this scenario and that you lose your sensory observation of sight so that you can just listen to the story. So I want you to imagine this situation. You've had a really long day at work. In fact, you've actually left an hour later than intended. It wasn't a great day. You had to skip lunch due to an urgent priority that required a lot of focus. Your head is actually pounding and you're ruminating over some passive-aggressive comments made by your colleague today. Thanks, Karen. You picked up the tots from daycare late and they're hungry and tired. It's also a scorching hot, typical Aussie summer day, and the traffic is extra heavy because of the time of the year. You know, the type of day where your clothes are sticking to parts of your body you didn't even know you had, and where cars are moving so slowly, pedestrians have managed to travel further and faster than you. The kids are becoming increasingly agitated and restless, and an eruption of some sort is hanging in the air, just like the same stifling heat. The air smells stale and so hot it seems to be singeing your nostrils. To top it off, you've just noticed your petrol tank is empty. So empty, in fact, you've turned off the aircon and are hoping that you can make it to the next petrol station without running out of fuel. Of course, you've wound the windows down, but the backed up traffic isn't allowing much airflow. Thankfully, after what feels like an eternity, you manage to pull into the the petrol station. And good news, petrol price is actually low, so clearly not an actual example of current circumstances. But damn, the bad news is everybody is fueling up. The kids are now a little bit more subdued. They're almost a little bit too tired. They're very visibly tired, in fact, and distressed, and the water you had on hand is empty. You're feeling a little parched yourself, which is making you feel even more exhausted. It makes sense to grab some water, and realizing the car is too warm to lift the kids in the back, you drag them into the station with you when you go to pay after filling up. That way you can all cool down while waiting to pay. Seeing the line is a little longer than you like, you beeline to the water section of the fridge and linger a little longer than you should to allow the cool, refreshing air from the open fridge cool you down. Then, rearranging the kids, you grab some water with a semi-free hand. Unfortunately, on the way back to the counter line, the kids spot the freezer and the signs above paddle pops. The youngest kid starts pulling on your hand and pointing to the sign in case you hadn't already seen it. At first, she asks ever so sweetly, looking very cute, but you barely notice and casually dismiss her whilst you try and juggle the water, the vice grip from your kid's arm, and finding your wallet in your purse. Or back pocket. Sorry, I should be inclusive of the dads out there as well. The pull on your arm from the youngest kid now becomes more urgent, and she starts exaggerating her words like, "Look, can I have one, please?" You look at her state a firm no in a tone that conveys you are not interested in discussing the matter any further. Then comes the onslaught of begging and the, "But why?" You're exhausted and are so tempted to retort angrily, "Because I said so." Instead, you reason calmly with your little one, "Because it'll ruin your appetite for dinner, sweetie." Your elder child chimes in and offers to share one and promises to eat his dinner anyway. "No," you state, and unfortunately your toddler is at her limits and starts wailing, "But I want one." Obviously, my toddler voice needs a little work. Sorry, guys. "Just kill me now," you think to yourself, as other people in the line turn with judging looks. You rush to the end of the line and you do what you can to subdue your youngest kid. When you finally get to the counter, the attendants ask, "Is that all?" and points to the sign which states that there's a 3 for 2 special on Milky Ways. The older child looks at you imploringly, and at the end of your tether, wanting to get out of the petrol station as quickly as possible, you concede, "Yes, whatever, just throw it in," figuring it won't hurt and ruin their appetite. When you get to the car, you dispense the chockies, and realizing you're starving yourself, you have the third one. Now you're disappointed with yourself and start beating yourself up. If only I had more willpower. So, is willpower important? You can open your eyes again now, by the way. Unless you just want to listen, you're more than welcome to do that. So anyway, as I asked before, is willpower important? Yes, but here's the tricky part. Willpower is not on call 24/7, and it is easily depleted. Every conscious decision we make, or every bit of resistance you make each day, or every silly question you have to answer that is against your default program is taxing on your mental system and depletes it. So toddlers who are, or young kids who have been learning about how their behavior impacts others inherently know your willpower is not invaluable. Aren't they clever? So they will try any manner of technique to whittle down your reserves until you concede. Oops, sorry, I've jumped ahead. Okay, so hopefully you're still with me and that all makes sense. So every day, without realizing it, we engage in all manner of activities that diminish our mental capacity, including our willpower. We deplete ourselves when we make decisions, suppress our feelings and impulses, or modify our behavior in pursuit of our goals, or just surviving the day. Like a phone, when we use it, the battery quickly diminishes. So when we make big decisions, have you ever noticed that we automatically say, "I'll sleep on it"? Why do you think that is? I'd like to think it's because we know we need the time, the space, and the emotional and mental energy to make it, and you need to recharge first. In essence, self-control, like decision-making, is a mental muscle flex that doesn't bounce back easily. Okay, let me just get to the next slide. Oh, so now I've got some stats. Now, guys, if any of you have read Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow, or Thinking Slow and Thinking Fast, I can't remember which one, by, and then also The One Thing by Gary Keller, you'll see that a lot of the stats that I've used are actually referring to research in those books, or actually in related books, but they're probably the most famous. So if you wanted to do extra reading or audio books, then I especially recommend The One Thing by Gary Keller. It's a good way of refocusing things in terms of your goals. Anyway, I digress. So it's there. I've actually got it in my notes. It's actually called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. So anyway, there's a couple of experiments that I'm just going to crudely summarize. So this example is at Stafford University, and there was a group of over 150 undergrads that were split into 2 groups, so roughly 75 per group. And there were, basically, one group had to memorize a 2-digit number, and the second group a 7-digit number. They then had to walk to another room once they were satisfied that they had memorized the number and could recite it. On the journey, both groups were offered a snack for participating in the study, a choice of chocolate cake or a fruit salad. So what's really interesting about this is that the group that had to memorize an extra 5 digits, that's it, just 5 digits. I mean, if you think about it, 7-digit is only a landline number. It's not even a mobile number. were almost twice as likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit cake. So, sorry, fruitcake. They were like twice as likely to choose chocolate cake over fruit salad. So a healthy option, or an unhealthy option versus a healthier option. So yeah, so if you think that you're the only one that can't resist, you know, morning tea or afternoon tea, well, looks like you're not the only one. Okay, so there's another research as well. So this is around, this actually analysed over 1,000 parole board hearings assigned to 8 judges over the better part of a year. The daily schedule for the judges is quite packed, requiring them to, oh, hang on, let me actually pull up the slide so you know what I'm talking about. Here we go. There we go. All right. Yeah, so the parole board, so they have quite a grueling schedule for the day, right? So they have to actually hear the arguments for parole for between 14 to 35 cases per day, which is quite a lot. They have about 6 minutes to render a decision per case. That's pretty sad, really, when you think about it. If somebody's freedom is on the line there and they've got 6 minutes to make a decision on their future. And throughout the day, they have only 2 breaks. So they have a morning tea and a lunch break. And so, as you can see through this graphical representation, right, in the morning and after each break, a parolee's chances for being released peaks to 65% and then plunges to almost 0 by the end of each period. So here you can see that's the morning. Oh, hang on, is it? Oh, yeah. So here you go. So this is the, it's not obviously a linear path, but this is just before the break. So you see 65%. And then as the day goes on over time, the favourable decisions tend to diminish to pretty much 0. So what I'm trying to illustrate by this is that there's a mental toll for repetitive decision making, which means that for you, you need to not only be aware of your old or default choices, but you need to be able to set yourself up for success when choosing new ones. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. The other thing I wanted to get across as well is that, so not only is self-control like a mental muscle in a sense that it depletes, it tends to be a fast twitch muscle where the more gosh, I'm losing my words now. Clearly, this is obviously taking a mental toll on me. Anyway, where basically your brain, it uses more mind power. It's like a fast twitch muscle. So if any of you have ever done exercise and things like that, we have slow twitch muscle fibers and fast twitch muscle fibers. And your fast twitch muscle fibers are like the ones that give you that real power. So sprinters have a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers, for example. Power lifters have a lot of fast twitch muscle fibers. And so essentially brain's like that. So the more mind power we use, the less minding power we actually have. And hence this is why I was getting to the point around minding our mind is important. So basically, and what I'm also getting at as well is that our mind throughout a day, it's not like it's running a marathon. It has no endurance whatsoever. So when our willpower is low, we actually fall back on our default settings. So if your default setting is to reach for chocolate cake instead of fruit salad, how do you think you're going to fare after a day of mentally taxing tasks? And also if that cake is in proximity. So as I said before, when you say you don't have willpower, it's not so much that you don't have willpower, it's just that you don't have willpower all the time and you can't will yourself even into having willpower. It doesn't work that way, right? You've got to kind of nurture your energy, a bit like the phone battery example that I used before. Okay, so let me get on to the next one. So what are some of, oh, here we go. I actually forgot to move on to the next slide. So this is little brain doing a little power lifter. So as I said, the brain is a power lifter or a sprinter rather than a marathon runner. And then these are some of the mentally taxing tasks. So these are your willpower thieves. So we have implementing new behaviors. So if you're trying to make a new habit this year, that's going to take a little bit more willpower. Filtering distractions. So you can imagine today's a modern world where we have things like social media, we have over stimulus, we have games, we have advertisements everywhere, we have ridiculously tasty food advertising at us all the time. So we're constantly filtering distractions, and we are probably busier than we've ever been, really, as a human race, I would suggest, than in previous times. So anytime that we resist temptation, and anytime that you make that decision to try and resist temptation, you are going to deplete your willpower. Suppressing an emotion. So if you're not giving yourself time to actually acknowledge if something's made you angry or upset or anything like that, then that's not going to help. And the same with restraining aggression as well. So again, if you haven't got a release for that kind of emotional energy, or something's really annoyed you and you have to calm yourself down, or at least pretend to be calm in front of others, it will actually deplete your willpower. And the same with suppressing impulses as well. I won't go into that one because that could get us down a bit of a rabbit hole there. The other things that would be pretty obvious as well is taking any kind of tests or exam, trying to impress others, coping with fear, doing something you don't enjoy. So if you're doing work and you're working there for 10 hours a day and you really don't enjoy it, then are you expecting that you're also going to have willpower to do the things that you really want to do? I would suggest not. And then the other one, of course, which is pretty obvious, is when we select a long-term reward over a short-term reward. Does that make sense so far? I might just flick over to you, Kathy, just to see if you're nodding. I forgot I told you to turn your video off, so I can't see if you're nodding. But anyway, I continue. Oh, yep. Thank you. Awesome. All right. So, oh, I've got a chat. Here we go. Let me just have a look. Thanks, Kathy. That's awesome. All right. Now, all right, let's get on to the next slide. So we've got our little knight here. So as I said before, when it comes to willpower, we seem to think it's at our beck and call. Willpower really, however, is probably a damsel in distress who really needs you to protect it valiantly. So how do we actually do this? Well, you need to mind your mind and give willpower the time of day, which we could break it down into a really simple two-part approach. Now, I'm not saying this is the be-all and end-all, but this is just one way to start thinking about it differently. So I think the first step, right, is realizing that willpower isn't something that makes it, that you lack, and that there's something wrong with you if you can't get willpower to work for you when it does. The first part is that you need to recognize that willpower in itself is almost its own beast, and you need to look after it to nurture it. So yeah, the first part of the two-part approach, as I said, is that well, you need willpower to actually be at its full strength to ensure you are doing the right thing when it comes to your health and fitness activities. So for example, and most people are like this, if you wake up first thing in the morning and before you start getting into your day and those sorts of things, your willpower is really good. So if you're trying to make a new habit, regardless of whether you prefer to exercise at night or in the morning, if you've got an option to implement a new habit in the morning, that might be your best option initially until it becomes a habit, and then you can potentially change the time of day that suits you better. The second part is then you need enough willpower during the day or during the rest of the day to support or avoid sabotaging what you've already done. Now that one's the really interesting part, right? And as I said to you before, sort of when we were talking about chocolate cake, it's one thing to have a default decision to reach for cake. It's quite another to make sure that your then environment is actually devoid of cake. And sometimes that'll be in our control and sometimes it won't. So anyway, my point is as well is that when implementing a new habit, it's really important that you set yourself up for success early in the day before your willpower gets sapped. And there's also an element of courage as well, which is required, which is to take small action in the face of fear, essentially. Now, oh, hang on, I need to get onto the next slide. So I guess the other part that I probably didn't elaborate on as well, I sort of mentioned that willpower is a bit like a phone battery, but it's actually a renewable energy, right? So it's not like, this is a good thing for us, right? It's not like, oh my God, I used all of my willpower when I was 20 and now I don't have any when I'm 40. It doesn't quite work that way, right? You get new willpower every day, but that really comes down to you actually also setting yourself up. So, you know, you would know as well that if you get a decent night's sleep and if you're eating well and those sorts of things, then your willpower actually becomes better because you've got more in the tank in terms of your energy levels. I'll just go back. When we talked about the brain having a fast twitch muscle as well, I don't know if you saw in one of my posts as well that, yes, that basically, you know, the brain is it only makes up 1/50th of your body mass, but it actually consumes 1/5 of the calories we burn for energy. And not only that, but the part of our brain that's responsible for focus, moderate impulse control, short-term memory, and problem solvings. So basically the epicenter for executive control, which is the stuff that we rely on the most when we're conscious, and willpower. And this is actually the prefrontal cortex. It's the first part of our brain to suffer as soon as we're depleted. So if you think about the brain, you know, there's parts of our reptilian brain that have been with us a lot longer. Our prefrontal cortex is part of the brain that's developed later in our evolutionary cycle, if I can just put this in layman's terms. And so what that means is that, you know, when we're low on sleep or low on energy and low on calories, the first part of our brain is the prefrontal cortex and our reptilian brain takes over. So you can imagine then if you actually want to make a conscious decision, you're pretty much going to luck out every time. So this is the other thing as well. So when you skip a meal, you deplete your willpower and make it harder to resist temptation later on. And then, yeah, I mean, can any of you think of how many times you've made it through a really tough day in the trenches, so to speak, and then the lure of a late night snack or overeating at dinner becomes your downfall? Okay, so I'll go back to where I was in the slides, in the presentation before. But essentially, we can actually circumvent our default settings by essentially creating an environment that kind of, you know, so if we do a few plans or put things in place, we can kind of just, if you think about your body being on autopilot and having default decisions, right? Then if you think about yourself being like a steam train that's just chugging along in whatever direction, essentially, if you think about and plan the sleepers or the rails, you can kind of effectively, you know, navigate that train throughout the day into the decisions that are more aligned to your goals. So back to this slide, how willpower really works. So we need to make sure that willpower is renewable energy, which needs to be protected and nurtured. And that actually involves us doing things that we can in terms of taking breaks to self-care and so on, making sure we're eating well and getting enough sleep. And then because self-control is not available on demand, we need to put things in place that can help buffer any default decision-making. And then, basically, as I said before as well, that your decisions will revert back to default when you're depleted. So what I'll get you to do for those who are actually still on and have access to the worksheet, we've actually got a little activity. So the activity, it's pretty simple. It's 2 minutes. It's really, now that you understand how willpower actually works, if you thought about something that you're trying to do in terms of your own goals, that maybe you're not hitting as consistently as you like. I want you to think of, just mentally for now, don't worry about filling it out in the sheet. What are 1, 2, 3 small things that you could do like now or first thing tomorrow morning that could leverage the strength of your willpower? So I've got a couple of examples here. So it could be as simple as, measuring out a serve of your leftover dinner for lunch tomorrow. It could be hiding snacks so they are out of sight. And if you want to eat more fruit, for example, then it's as simple as putting a fruit basket on your kitchen bench where you're going to see it. I know that if my husband, for example, isn't eating enough fruit, I will buy a bag of grapes and place them on the counter. Not only does he eat fruit, but he's such a giving and loving person that he'll actually bring me a grape randomly throughout the day. Just the one. Anyway, so my point is that when things are easy and they're there, you will likely to do them without even thinking, right? So the same is with snacks. So if you make your snacks not visible and make it inconvenient, then you won't, out of sight, out of mind, right? And the other thing is you could, for example, if you never have time for breakfast in the morning and you're trying to eat healthier and things like that, then, throwing a few ingredients into a blender ready for tomorrow morning, so that you can then, press a button first thing in the morning, or you can even make up tonight, put it in the freezer or the fridge. And then it could even be something as well, like if you're planning on going for a walk first thing in the morning or want to go to the gym, the best thing to do is to always lay out your clothes the night before, because then you don't have to make that decision. It's literally just there. You literally whack it on when you're half asleep, and then before you know it, you're out the door and doing your actions. So notice as well that all of these actions are really easy, right? They take no time, but also there's a bit of an element of excitement because you feel like you're in control, right? You're in the driver's seat and you're like, I've done one thing towards my goal. I don't have to think about that tomorrow. So the other thing is as well, you would have picked up, there's some other common themes, right? So one, it was around, it's obvious. It's attractive, like prepping a smoothie, for example, is delicious. And then how can you make it easy? And then how can you make it satisfying as well? So if you can add a gamifying element to it, or, just feeling like, you've made one small win and recognizing that behavior towards a goal, then that might be a way to help circumvent that. So I'll just quickly pop up the worksheet. So I've just done this so that you don't have to use this, obviously. You could probably just use a mental prompt if you want. But the reason I do actually say it is, one, you need to choose the right action. It needs to actually work towards a goal that you're working on, because otherwise you won't do it, right? Because you won't see the importance. So I would argue that anything that you want to do should be connected to a larger purpose. And so if you now actually spend the time to think about what your small 2 to 5 minute action would be, how it's related to your goal. And I've got an example here. So I'll measure out my leftovers tonight so that I have food ready to go in the morning. Why? Because I want to eat better so I have enough energy for the day to do the things that I love. So pretty simple, right? So that's as simple as we're going there. And then at the bottom as well, you've got a little checklist. So are they clear and concise? Is it specific? And is it doable? So the other thing I would argue as well is I will measure out my leftovers tonight. So I could actually make that better and say, I will measure out my leftovers as soon as I've served up my plate for dinner tonight so that I have food ready to go in the morning for lunch tomorrow. Why? Because I want to eat better so that I can have enough energy for the day to do the things that I love. Now, the reason I say that, if anyone's read James Clear's Atomic Habits, well, there's an element around being very specific. If you're very specific around taking a very small action, what you're essentially doing is you are associating a very small action with something that you're already doing. So you already have a habit. So the habit of serving up your dinner for the night. And what you're doing then is if you've actually created space and habit intention, which makes that action a lot easier. You've essentially in your head just made a plan. I am going to do this action right now because it does this and this and this. So you're almost holding yourself to account. So a lot of people will say, yeah, I'll go and do this thing. But then it's just this thing that hangs into space. It's like, yeah, I'll go hang out the washing. Yeah, but when are you going to hang out the washing? or when I feel like it. When will you ever feel like hanging out washing? Nobody ever feels like hanging out washing. So be specific. And then if you get in the habit of doing that and then saying it out loud, for example, then you'll find yourself just going and doing these things because you've actually created space, you've been very specific, and you're holding yourself to account without even realizing it. So the other thing is as well, there's actually a bonus page for the Daily Small Action Planner. It's what I've called a litmus test, and I've got to stop writing words that I'm struggling to pronounce. And this was just, these are the 4 questions that James Clear actually uses for Atomic Habits. So if you want to get more cheat sheets or, download the audiobook or anything like that, then I recommend going to actually jamesclear.com, I think it is, or atomichabits.com. There's heaps of free resources there. And that's essentially it. So what I thought I would do now is that's the first lesson. So hopefully you got something out of that. I'm going to open up for questions just shortly. But I would just tell you what the next. So lessons 2 and 3 are going to is called Whipping Discipline's Butt. And lesson 2, the lesson outcomes will be debunking what you think about, what you think you know about discipline, why selective discipline matters, and how we use discipline to build habits. And it's, it just expands a little bit more on this, but we start to make it, we start to break down how we apply discipline. And then by doing that action, you actually end up having discipline. But it's not discipline itself, if that makes sense. It's actually the habits. But we'll get into that more in lessons 2 and 3. So just a reminder before I open it up to questions as well. I do have a special offer. So for those of you who aren't aware, I am running an inaugural Incredible You, well, actually it's a one-off because I have named the program 2022. It's not going to be 2022 next year, is it? So it's Incredible You in 2022. So what this is a 12-week transformation program from the comfort of your own home. There's no diet, no exercise. It's a pragmatic course with group coaching sessions and basically, weekly lessons, tutorials, and also, access to other free resources like meal plans and so on, or recipes and so on. So tonight I'm offering 2 lucky people the full 12-week program at half price. So I'm going to offer if you're on live, 1 person live and 1 person on the replay. So you just need to either DM me straight away or basically the first 2 people to DM me or to write comments are basically in. And I've made the payment options really accessible as well. So if you want to save yourself the best payment option, the cheapest option is the $500 upfront. If you want to spread it over 12 payments, it's less than $50 a week. And then if that's still too much for you, then there's another option for less than $30 a week for less than 6 months. So the idea there is if you're really struggling to, or find the space or to know how to implement the right action at the right time in terms of your health and fitness, or you're hit a plateau, or you're not sure if you're doing things right, then this is a real, this course is geared towards that. It's essentially turning everything that you think you know into healthy fitness habits, or well, it's really nutrition to start off with, and really breaking that down into really pragmatic steps. So you would have seen today, we're breaking things down into daily actions that we can do and do repeatedly. Like basically you should, on a scale of 1 to 10, be at an 8, 9 or 10 in terms of the actions that you have to walk away with. And your homework is easy, right? Because your homework will be this 1 or 2 actions that you've got. And then you will be held you'll be held to account with that. You'll have accountability partners and so on. So the whole idea is really to get you into that transformation change. And if you follow this and we work out your right dietary calories and you stick to that plan and you have no underlying medical conditions, obviously, then you will get into the best shape of your life. And that's before we even bring in the exercise element to it. I will argue that exercise is important, but some of you aren't ready for that. So this is almost like an exercise readiness course as well. All right, moving on. I'll come back to the question time. I just wanted to say as well that for those who have attended and are interested, this is actually the QR code for your free gift, which is the Smooth Operator program. It is essentially a smoothie recipe collection. So if you would like to get your hands on that, make sure you scan the QR code. I can also send you the link. Just comment below if you'd like the smoothie pack in the comments, and I will get that out to you. All right, so I'm just going to go on to Facebook and see if there's any questions. And I'll just check the Zoom as well. Kathy, if you're still there, did you have any questions? You can type them if you feel shy coming on to the Zoom and the Facebook Live. I can completely understand that. I'm just going to check Facebook now as well. Right, there's a few comments, but no actual questions at this stage. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for being a trooper and staying on for the entire webinar. That was awesome. And I can see that there's a few of you who've watched it live on Facebook too. So thank you so much for making the time. I hope you found that useful. As I've said before as well, if you've got any topics that you'd like to know more about, or you've got any feedback, you know, tell us what you're liking, what you're not liking. My whole idea here is to get you connected with access to resources and things to help you with your own journey. So let me know. The more you share with me, the more I can help you. So, yeah. Oh, thanks, Kathy. I really appreciate it. Awesome. All right. Well, I will give everybody 7 minutes back of their time. Thank you so much, and see you for sessions 2 and 3, which will be released probably in February and March. All right. Have a great evening. Thank you.